Hey folks, this is Vince with Dad's Gaming Addiction, and today we're going to take a quick look at the game Dice Crawl. This is a quick and easy to play dungeon crawler that makes heavy use of dice while also supporting up to 4 players. It's important to know that this game is currently seeking funding through the Kickstarter process, today being 12/21/2013. This makes everything that you see here subject to change. Without further ado, let's just take a quick look at the components and see how the game is played. As far as the components are concerned, my prototype copy came with a total of 48 of these dungeon tiles. And as you can see, they are interchangeable. They can simply be flipped or rotated in a particular way to sort of change the layout of the dungeon in question. The game also comes with 4 of these class cards. Each player will be receiving a random class card at the beginning of the game, and as you can see, each class card has different abilities. The same thing with these race cards. Each player will be receiving one of these race cards at random at the beginning of the game, and again, each race card has a different set of abilities on them. Finally, you have these powers reference cards. Basically, all of the powers listed on these class and races cards are listed here, just so players can keep track of what each power does. Now, the game would also normally come with a number of dice as well as 4 player markers. Unfortunately, my prototype copy did not come with any of that, so I've had to sort of fill it in with some other things here. Normally, there would be 4 player markers, 1 of each color, and there would be 4 sets of dice, the colors of which would match the colors of the player markers. Now, the rules specify that each player will be receiving 20 or 25 dice at the beginning of the game, so I imagine that in the final version of the game, each game set would come with a total of 20 or 25 dice per color. As far as setting up the game, what you'll do is you'll take the 48 dungeon tiles and pick out 25 of them and place them face down in a 5x5 grid like so. Each player will also get a race and a class card as well as a quick reference card. They'll also choose a player pawn of a particular color, and they'll also receive a set of dice of the matching color. Again, a player will either receive 20 or 25 dice, depending on how easy they want to make the game. 20 dice is a standard game, while 25 is an easier game. To sum up Dice Crawl, each player will be trying to advance their player pawn from one of the corners in which they start, and be attempting to move them to the center of the board where the treasure is located. The first player that manages to get to the center of the board and reveal it and move there will ultimately end the game and score some victory points for their trouble. Now, that doesn't always necessarily mean that they'll actually win the game. Each of these dungeon tiles actually has a point value associated with them. As players move through the dungeon, they'll be placing their own dice onto these particular dungeon tiles. And when a person has the majority of their dice controlling this card, they'll actually earn this many victory points at the end of the game. So players will not only be trying to reach the center of the board in order to get the bonus victory points located there, but they'll also be trying to control as many tiles as possible in order to earn themselves the most victory points. And ultimately, at the end of the game, whoever has the most victory points will win. Alright, now a player will actually be allowed to do a number of different things on their turn. I'm not going to go into detail too much here just because it might take a while, but I will touch on the highlights. For the very first turn of the game, the player will go ahead and flip over the dungeon tile closest to them, and they can rotate the tile if they so want. But once it is put down, it is locked, and it cannot be rotated again unless affected by a racial or class ability. Now the player pawn will be put on top of it, and now the player will go ahead and take their turn. Before they actually do anything, they can reveal or scout. And what that simply involves is revealing means that you can flip over an adjacent tile, while scouting is just another word for moving. You can move to an adjacent tile. However, you cannot scout or move to an adjacent tile unless you've completely filled up the tile that you're currently sitting on. Now at this point, a player will choose 5 of their dice from their available pool and roll them, and they'll have to decide how they want to assign those 5 dice to either the dungeon itself or onto their racial and class cards. They don't have to assign any dice if they don't want to. Now, whenever they go to assign dice to the dungeon, they are limited to dungeon tiles that have player pawns on them. So this player could assign dice to this current tile here, where their pawn is currently sitting. If the enemy had a tile in the bottom right-hand corner that was flipped over and they were sitting on, they could, if they wanted to, assign dice to that dungeon tile, or they can assign unused dice to any of these 2 cards here, the racial and the class cards. Now, in this case, let's just assume I rolled, and let's say I rolled a 4. I could assign that die to this 4 here onto this dungeon tile. And again, the person who controls the majority of that tile with their dice will win the victory points located at the center of the card. Now let's also assume for the minute that I went ahead and rolled 2 3s. Let me see if I can do that, and a 3, if I could find it, there we go. Again, each ability is different, so you'll need to take a look at your reference card. Whenever you assign the appropriate dice onto your class or racial cards, that'll unlock that ability for a future turn. And if you roll the requirement, which is in parentheses here, in this case, attack in parentheses +1, you can use an unused die in your roll to use that ability. Some are passive, some are not. Under the powers reference card attack, roll 2 dice and attack any 1 unit on the board, replacing it. So that's a pretty powerful ability. You can actually get rid of your opponent's dice while putting some of your dice onto that position if you're successful. So now that this player has assigned and unlocked that, and assigned a dice there, they could end their turn. The 5 and 6 really wouldn't help them out in any particular way. And with that being done, that would end their turn, and the other player would attempt to do the same thing. And this will continue back and forth with players taking turns rolling dice and assigning those dice to both the dungeon tiles and onto their racial and class cards. Now the game will end in one of 2 ways. If a person manages to reach the center, that will signal the game's end, and the person who does so earns 3 victory points. The game can also end when a player goes to roll dice from their pool, but find that they have none to roll. Now, at the end of the game, the players will add up their victory points, again, from the center of the board, whoever managed to do that, and they'll also take into account any tiles that they have under their control. Again, the person with the majority of dice there will control that particular dungeon tile and earn the victory points listed. There's a few other ways to earn victory points that I didn't touch on, like horde tiles, but this should just give you the gist of it. And the person that earns the most victory points will win the game. And there you have it. That's just a very quick look at the game Dice Crawl. I didn't get to cover all of the rules found in the manual, but this should just give you a general idea as far as how the game is played. If you like what you see here, feel free to check out the game on Kickstarter. There's a link in the below description. You can also check out my written preview at www.dadsgamingaddiction.com. This is Vince. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.